where heads of state, sports, entertainment, and political celebrities meet. You're listening to Armstrong Williams.
Short stories from the Long War. I don't know why, but, I read, I don't know, I love war stories. I watch these war movies, and I've always been fascinated with the Civil War, and always was been sort of wanted to be more engaged with how soldiers contended with the horrors of battle while under fire and when they left the front. And so, it's obvious that on both sides you struggle to live up to the standards demanded by sort of a sentimental culture that encourages Americans to believe that soldiers could overcome the emotional turmoil of combat through manliness, raw courage, and high character. And this expectation, I think, Roy, was shattered on the battlefield, but civilians back home retain their idealistic beliefs. And I think that's all it is. It's an idealistic belief. And so what we have to do, we have to sort of transform here where we are, soldiers to the point from idealistic and naive recruits into hardened veterans who folded into themselves during the war. But after the conflict, when they grew nostalgic about the war, they sanitized their military experience, a trend that continues to influence the interpretation of war in history today.
Yeah, I think it's difficult for people because for most Americans, the only war they know is through war stories. They've seen movies, maybe they've read about it. But it's a foreign land for most people, and so when soldiers come back from that, there's a tendency to stereotype those soldiers, to see them either as super soldiers, some sort of untouchable heroes, or to see them as traumatized, suffering victims of a war machine that chewed them up and spit them out, or even to see them as some sort of dangerous psycho who could flip their lid at any moment. And we're none of those things. Or, if we are those things, we're all of those things and more. Veterans are people, and you made this point earlier about the fact that this is a military service. This is an occupation. This is a job for thousands and thousands of Americans, and that's been a key point and a key part of the vision for Fire and Forget, is to bring out the fact that war is an occupation and war is a job, and the people who go over and serve, they're regular people, just like you and me, just like everyone else. They're people doing a job. One great way that gets shown is through Gavin Ford Kovite's story, When Engaging Targets Remember. It's a sort of choose-your-own-adventure story. I don't know if your listeners will remember these books where you pick how it goes. It comes to decision points, and you decide to go left or to go right, to go in the cave or to go up the mountain. Well, what Gavin does is he puts the reader right in the gunner's hatch in a Humvee in Iraq, and you see what that job is like, and what the consequences of decisions in that job can be like. Because what happens with Gavin's story isn't, you decide whether to go in the cave or not, but you have to decide whether or not to shoot an oncoming car that might have a bomb in it, or it might have a family. And that stress and that tension gets brought out by many of the stories in this collection, but particularly in that way with Gavin's.
I don't know how you're going to respond to this because, but I'm going to put it out there. It was recently revealed that educational grants for veterans will be severely curtailed after the next semester. And in my opinion, in many cases, veterans join the military to take advantage of this educational benefit. And then at the same time, gentlemen, educational grants for illegal aliens will be continued. Now, I don't listen. I don't know what this says about our priorities in this country, but how in God's name can anyone justify lessening the educational values and advantages of our men and women that give their lives and sacrifice their limbs and their families and their emotional stability every day, and leaving illegal aliens benefits untouched? How do you rationalize these kinds of policies?
Well, as far as I'm aware, the GI Bill benefits have not and will not be touched. What I've read about is tuition assistance programs for service members still in the military, and it's a shame, and it's terrible that it's part of the political volleyball that's going on. That's one of the things that's getting slashed. These are the kind of questions, in addition to the kind of the VA healthcare benefits we were talking about earlier, that needed to be discussed before a military excursion overseas, because the consequences, the wars don't end just with a date. Just to give you an idea of how long, we as a government and as taxpayers have to pay the bill for veterans. As of 2 years ago, there was still a widow of a Civil War veteran. She had married him when she was very young and he was very old, but there was still a widow of the Civil War veteran receiving a monthly stipend from the VA. These wars will cost us for years on end, and these are the questions we need to explore before, not after.
What is it that you think that the reader needs to get from the book that even amazed you guys when you saw the completed product, and the reaction of what really has impacted we the people?
The two things that seem most important for readers to walk away with from this book would be, the first one would be that there isn't one story about these wars. It's not just SEAL Team 6, or it's not just the Hurt Locker. Thousands of people fought in these wars, and there are thousands upon thousands of stories to be told. And so that the variety of stories, the variety of voices involved, and the different ways people thought about their experience during and after seems to me to be one of the most important things I would hope a reader would take away. And the other one is simply the point I made earlier, that these are human beings, that our veterans and our soldiers and our Marines and airmen and sailors, they're human beings. They're men and women. They're not heroes. They're not savages. They're not victims. They're people who are working through difficult situations and on the front lines, working a dangerous job, but they're people.
It's Wildfire and Forget. The title.
Why Fire and Forget?
Yes.
That's great. It actually, the term comes from high-tech weapon systems. It's a kind of missile that when you shoot it, it requires no additional guidance. It'll just find its own target, right? And there's a certain resonance in the title, but really what it does for us is it says something about this sort of this double-edged problem we all face with what to do with our experience. Because on the one hand, we want to tell people, we feel obliged to tell people, we're responsible as witnesses or as just people who have been there as citizens to tell our stories and to embody those. But then on the other hand, there's nothing most of us would rather do some days than just forget it all and get on with life.
Right, yeah. No, there's both a real earnestness in the title and just a hint of irony. And I think we all, when we came across it, all loved that ambiguity reflected in the title.
In closing, what wisdom can you share with the listeners that are thinking about going to combat, serving this country, those that are already there? What is the lesson you did not get that would have better prepared you not only for the war zone but returning home?
There's a popular military phrase that maybe some of your listeners are familiar with called Semper Gumby. It's kind of a joke of the Marines' phrase Semper Fi. Semper Gumby means always flexible. And every day in the military was unlike the other one. And certainly when I first came home as a veteran, I needed to take the same approach and avoid the rigidity that we like to instill in ourselves and our ideals and our principles. I went over to Iraq in 2007. Preparing for force on force, and participated in a counterinsurgency where most of my interactions were with Iraqi civilians, and so staying always flexible was so important, both over there and then back at home.
My advice would be the same advice I would give to the government with regard to our vets, and it's just to have a plan for what happens after. If someone's going into the military as a young person, maybe they'll do it as a career. That's great if they choose that, but it's important, for them to have a plan for the next step after that.
Listen, thank you both for joining us. Fire and Forget, Roy Scranton and Matt Gallagher. Go out and get a copy.
Thanks, Armstrong.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. We'll be back with Melvin Goodman. Don't go away. National Insecurity.